No one noticed the dog at first. He sat outside the hospital doors, silent, still as if carved from memory. Nurses passed. Patients glanced. But only one girl knew the truth. Zephyr wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier, a survivor. And now, her shadow. What happened before this moment was buried deep. A war, a letter never sent, a betrayal that tore lives apart. But fate brought Eleanor into Zephyr's life, and in doing so, gave them both a second chance. This is the story of how a war dog became a guardian, how a girl who lost everything found someone who never let go, and how love, even after trauma, finds a way to heal. The clock on the wall blinked 6:07 a.m. The sky outside was still a soft slate gray, the world not yet fully awake. But inside the small yellow house at the edge of Maplewood, the day had already begun in quiet choreography. Eleanor sat cross-legged at the edge of her bed, fingers tapping a silent rhythm on her pajama pants. 3 beats, pause, then 5. Her chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. She didn't speak. She rarely did. But her eyes flicked toward the doorway, waiting. And right on cue, Zephyr appeared. The old German shepherd moved like a shadow, quiet but solid, the pads of his paws barely making a sound on the wood floor. He nudged the bedroom door open with his snout, then paused, watching her. His ears pricked. No bark, no command. He didn't need one. Eleanor held up her hand-flat palm, trembling slightly. Zephyr approached and gently pressed his massive head against it, grounding her. It was their unspoken ritual. Tension melted from her shoulders. There was no leash in this house, no collars, no words either, most mornings. But there was rhythm, there was trust. Zephyr knew when to move, when to wait, when to touch, and when to stay still. He could smell the cortisol in her sweat when her mood dipped or spiked. He could hear the change in her breathing when her body began to tip toward a seizure. He was her shield, her comfort, and her compass, all wrapped in a coat of steel-gray fur and decades of training that hadn't dulled one bit. Eleanor rose to her feet, stiff, slow, but steady. She walked to the window and opened it 3 inches. Always 3. The scent of lavender from the backyard garden drifted in, mingling with the cool morning air. Zephyr padded behind her, then walked over to the desk where her clothes had been laid out the night before. He sat. "Okay," she whispered, the word dry from disuse. That one word was enough. Zephyr turned and trotted to the bathroom. Eleanor followed. They brushed teeth together, Eleanor holding her electric brush in one hand, the other gently resting on Zephyr's back. The hum soothed her. When she blinked too long, threatening to drift into an absent stare, Zephyr gave a soft chuff to bring her back. By 6:47 a.m. they were at the breakfast table. A single egg, cut into perfect halves. Toast, diagonally sliced. A cup of warm milk, never cold. These were not preferences. They were rules. Rules her mind needed to feel safe in a world that never stopped shifting. Zephyr lay beneath the table, his nose brushing her bare ankle. Eleanor barely ate, but when she did, it was always under his gaze. From the kitchen counter, a handwritten note in careful cursive, "Working the early shift. Grandma's waiting for you today. Zephyr knows the way. I love you, Mom." Eleanor folded the note neatly into quarters and placed it in her backpack. She didn't need it to know what came next. Zephyr was already at the door, standing beside her, shoes left and right, reversed as she always liked them. She sat on the bottom stair to tie them. Zephyr rested his chin on her knee, letting her focus, keeping her still. No sudden movements, no barking at squirrels. He had learned to mute every instinct he once honed in war. With her, he was all patience. Outside, the world had brightened just enough to give the sidewalk a golden edge. Dew glistened on the tips of every blade of grass. Zephyr walked slightly ahead, never pulling, ears back in alert but relaxed posture. As they turned onto Willow Avenue, Eleanor reached out and touched his flank, fingers brushing against the scar under his fur, an old bullet wound, long healed but always remembered. Zephyr slowed, let her hand linger. Her grandmother lived just 8 blocks away, a simple walk. But for Eleanor, it was a journey through layers of light and sound and smell that could overwhelm her at any moment. A car honked in the distance. Zephyr flicked his ear. Eleanor flinched, then looked at him. He blinked slowly. She mirrored him, blinked, exhaled. They kept walking. By the time they passed the post office, she had started humming a faint tune. It was a song her mother used to sing when she was little, something about stars and paper boats. Zephyr didn't know the melody, but he recognized the rhythm of calm. He kept to her pace. The hospital was 3 blocks away now. The buildings grew taller, the sidewalk harder, colder. The smell of disinfectant and concrete mingled in the air. Zephyr's gait shifted, not visible to a stranger, but to Eleanor it was clear. He was alert now, more so than before. They paused outside the front gate of Mercy Wing Palliative Center, beside the rose garden. Zephyr didn't move. His ears twitched. A breeze blew through the hedge. He sniffed, subtle but intent. Somewhere in the undercurrent of fresh mulch and flowers, something metallic lingered. Not danger yet, but something familiar. A scent of steel, oil, and engine exhaust. Ghosts of an old world, maybe. His body held still, but every cell in him was on standby. Eleanor stood beside him, fingers brushing the lavender bracelet on her wrist. She didn't speak, just waited. After a long pause, Zephyr blinked and turned to her. He nudged her gently forward. They moved again, toward the doors where a nurse smiled softly at their approach. "You're right on time, Miss Eleanor," she said. "Your grandma's been waiting." Eleanor nodded once, then looked at Zephyr. He gave one low chuff, and just like that, they stepped inside. The hallway leading to room 217 was long and silent, lit by a soft, sterile glow that made everything feel suspended in time. The polished floor clicked faintly under Zephyr's paws, but even his steps seemed to hush themselves as they neared the threshold. Eleanor walked beside him, her small hand resting lightly on his back, not to guide. He didn't need that, but to feel anchored. She hated hospitals. The smells were too sharp. The lights buzzed overhead like insects. But today, there was something heavier in the air than her usual discomfort, something that made her chest feel full and hollow at once. Nora was dying. She knew it, even if no one had said the words directly. Earlier that morning, her mom had kneeled by her bed and spoken softly, brushing a lock of hair from Eleanor's cheek. "I can't go with you today, sweetheart. I'll be on double shift till evening, but Zephyr knows the way, and Grandma's waiting for you." She'd nodded, no protest, no tears. Zephyr had stood ready by the door, already sensing the shift in energy, the kind that didn't come with alarms but sank into the bones. Now, as they reached the door, he paused, not from hesitation, but instinct. His ears twitched. A scent lingered, faint, nearly swallowed by the sterility of bleach and plastic, but still there. Something off. Not dangerous, not yet, but enough to make him scan the garden outside, the hedge line, the faint trail of rubber and engine oil. He didn't growl, just filed the scent away like a trained soldier scanning a threat map. Eleanor noticed his pause. She crouched slightly and touched his collarbone under the fur the way Nora had taught her. "Easy," she whispered. And then, together, they entered. Nora Layton had once been a legend, a canine handler, decorated in 2 tours overseas. She trained dogs that sniffed out bombs, found missing soldiers, and in one now mythic mission saved 6 civilians by trusting the sudden freeze in her dog's stance when others doubted it. She was made of grit and instinct, with a voice that once made grown recruits stand taller. But now, lying against a white pillow that seemed to swallow her frame, she looked like a memory of that woman, shrunken, pale, but somehow still defiant. Her gray hair was tied back neatly. On her nightstand sat an old photo. Her in uniform, a leash in one hand, the other resting proudly on a lean young Zephyr, his ears sharp as blades. When she saw them enter, her lips curled, not into a smile, but something fiercer. "Well, would you look at that?" she rasped, voice gravelly but warm. "The old man still remembers his way around this damn place." Zephyr's ears perked, and he stepped forward with sudden energy. He nosed at the side of her bed gently, tail wagging low. Nora reached out, her hand trembling but purposeful, and cupped his massive head. "There you are, soldier." Eleanor stood back, watching the exchange. Her eyes stayed dry, but her fingers clenched into fists at her sides. Nora turned to her granddaughter, eyes sharp. "Come here, Firefly." The nickname startled something inside Eleanor. She hadn't heard it in months. She stepped forward and let Nora take her hand, cold, veined, but still strong in its own way. "You're taller," Nora said, eyeing her critically. "And quieter. That means you're getting smarter." Eleanor gave a tiny nod, lips pressed into a thin line. "You know, I wasn't supposed to be allowed dogs when I started training with the 14th, Nora muttered, glancing at Zephyr. "Too old, too female, too everything. But I told 'em, give me the one nobody else wants, the one they think is too stubborn or too broken. And that was your boy here." She scratched behind Zephyr's ears, and he leaned into it with a soft groan of approval. First week, he broke a kennel door. Second week, he saved a private from stepping on a landmine. I stopped questioning him after that. Eleanor finally smiled, just barely. Then Nora's face turned serious. "Listen, Firefly, there are some things I need to say before I go." Eleanor looked down. Her fingers twitched. "Don't look away," Nora said gently. "Not from me. Not from this." Zephyr sat beside her, his body still, but his eyes tracking every breath, every tremble. "The world's not fair. It's loud, unkind. It won't wait for you to catch up. But you've got something most kids your age don't." She reached out, touched Eleanor's temple. "You see the world different. That's not a flaw. That's an edge." Then her fingers moved, barely brushing Eleanor's chest. "And you've got him. Zephyr," who, even now, was watching the open door as if expecting something he couldn't name. "He'll never leave your side." "Not unless you ask him to. And even then, I'm not so sure." The room was quiet for a long time. The monitor beeped steadily in the background. Then Nora looked to Zephyr again. "Old boy, promise me. One more mission." Zephyr raised his head. Nora held his gaze. "Protect her, whatever it takes." The shepherd didn't bark, didn't move. But something in the silence shifted. A vow was made, without sound, without command. Just the understanding of two warriors, one passing the torch to the other. Eleanor reached for Zephyr's neck, buried her face against him. He stood like stone, his chest rising slowly, shielding her. Nora leaned back, eyes soft. "You're my legacy," she whispered. And for the first time that day, her hand trembled, not from illness, but peace. The path through Cedar Grove Park was narrow and cracked, its once straight bricks warped by the roots of old trees. Sunlight slanted through the canopy in golden strips, casting moving shadows that rippled across the ground like water. It was the kind of park people passed through but didn't linger in, not because it was dangerous, but because it felt forgotten. Forgotten places held echoes. Zephyr walked slightly ahead, his gait steady, deliberate. Eleanor followed, her backpack swinging lightly at her side. She didn't mind the quiet. Silence was her sanctuary, especially when Zephyr was there. His presence filled in the blanks where words didn't reach. But today, something felt off. At first it was barely a flicker, his ears twitching more often, his pause slowing at intersections he normally breezed through. He would stop, sniff the air, scan the bushes, then move, but not with the same ease. Eleanor noticed it. She always did. "What is it?" she asked quietly, not expecting a reply, but offering the question like a ribbon of trust. Zephyr didn't respond. His eyes, dark and deep with memory, swept the horizon. He was drawing from somewhere else now, another place, another life, a life of sand and wire and gunpowder, where quiet meant ambush, where wind carried the breath of men lying in wait. They passed a wooden bench covered in moss. A squirrel darted out and ran across the path. Zephyr didn't even flinch. That was the second sign. The first rule in his old life: if the obvious distracts you, the unseen kills you. They continued forward, past the rusted water fountain, and toward the bend where the trees grew denser. To the left, a service trail cut through the underbrush, a known shortcut, but poorly maintained. That's where Eleanor usually turned. Today was no different. But Zephyr halted. His tail dropped low, not tucked, not panicked, just lowered alert. Then came the third sign, faint, almost nothing. But Zephyr froze, one paw raised mid-step. Somewhere up ahead, a faint crunch gravel pressed under weight. Not rhythmical like a jogger, heavy, deliberate. Boots. Another sound. A low, brief rev an engine turning over and cutting out again. Then silence. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. She stepped close to him, her fingers brushing his collar for reassurance. Zephyr's body stood stone still, muscles tense beneath his coat. His ears swiveled like radar dishes, trying to triangulate. And then she heard it too. A voice. Not words, but tone, sharp, male, muffled through distance and trees. Zephyr let out a low chuff, just one breath, barely audible. Not aggression, a warning. She followed his lead and crouched slightly behind him, her eyes scanning the trail that curved toward the small pedestrian bridge ahead. No one. Just empty trail, dappled sunlight, and silence too deep to trust. He looked back at her. His eyes held a message. Wait. Listen. trust. She nodded. Then movement. A figure, half seen through the trees, riding something, motorized, maybe an e-bike, maybe more. Not one rider. Two. They didn't see her. Not yet. Zephyr began to back up, slow and precise. No panic. Tactical retreat. She mirrored him, step for step, breath held. A crow cawed from a distant branch. Then silence again. But that silence wasn't natural anymore. It was constructed, like someone waiting for noise to cover noise. She could feel it now, humming beneath her skin, the presence, not just strangers, wrong energy. Zephyr's breath was slow, but his tail twitched again. The last time she saw that twitch was last fall, when a man tried to snatch a child near the farmer's market, and Zephyr had launched without hesitation. Today he hadn't launched, not yet, but he was close. They reached a fork in the trail. One led toward the city street, open and visible. The other veered left through a thicket of tangled branches toward a stone wall that bordered the back of the hospital gardens. Nora had shown Eleanor that path once, called it the back door route. Zephyr made the choice. He angled left. They moved faster now, not running, but urgent. Behind them, the hum of wheels returned, louder, closer, and then voices. "You sure she's alone?" "Shut up and watch the damn trail. That dog's a shepherd. Look how it moves." Eleanor's breath caught. They knew. Zephyr heard it too. His pace changed. His body lowered slightly, like a panther entering stealth. But there was no fear in him. Only calculation. They reached the stone wall. He nudged her toward it. Climb. Now. She threw her backpack over and scrambled up the rough edge. Her palms stung, knees scraped. She didn't cry. Zephyr waited until she dropped to the other side. Then he turned. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but his posture made one thing clear. You want her, you come through me. And for a few seconds, everything held still. The wind changed just before they appeared. It was subtle, a shift in pressure. The scent of oil and exhaust threading through the leaves of Cedar Grove Park like a warning, whispered too late. Zephyr's ears pricked first. His hackles rose in silence. A low vibration pulsed in his chest. Not yet a growl, not yet a threat. Just a ripple of awareness from deep inside a soldier's bones. Eleanor stood beside the stone wall, one hand brushing moss from her scraped palm, the other reaching instinctively for Zephyr's fur. She didn't see them yet, but she felt him tense. Then they emerged, black leather against green and gold. 6 men, boots heavy. Vests stitched with skulls, chains, rust-colored patches. Their bikes weren't with them now, but the sound still clung to them like thunder that hadn't fully gone. And at the center, towering like a piece of carved iron, was him. Gunner Briggs, late 40s. Broad like a prison gate. Tattooed arms coiled with muscle and scars. His nose had been broken twice and never fixed. His eyes, slate gray and sunburnt, didn't blink as they locked onto Eleanor. He stepped forward. No hesitation, no confusion. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his voice gravel wrapped in fire. "You're the spitting image." Eleanor froze. Zephyr moved half a step in front of her, head lowered, tail stiff, not tucked, not high. Neutral. Ready. Gunner cocked his head and grinned. The kind of grin that said he didn't believe in second chances, only in old debts. "Caleb Dawson's blood, ain't you?" he muttered, almost to himself. "I can see it in your jaw, your damn eyes." He wasn't asking. Eleanor shook her head slowly. "I don't know who that is," she said, voice small but steady. Behind Gunner, 2 of his men began to fan out. Not fast, but casual like hyenas, pretending they weren't circling. Zephyr's growl deepened. The sound rolled from his chest, low and deliberate. Back off. Or bleed. Gunner didn't flinch. He crouched just slightly, eye level with the shepherd. "You remember me, don't you, dog?" he said softly, a smirk twitching on his lips. "Or maybe you just smell what I've done." Zephyr did remember. Not Gunner's face, but the kind of soul that left blood on concrete. The scent of violence that stained a man's breath long after the act. Zephyr had known men like this in the desert, in alleyways of Kabul, in interrogation pits behind safe houses where light never reached. Eleanor's breathing hitched. She gripped Zephyr's harness. He shifted just enough to block her again. "I said—" She tried once more, voice firmer. "I don't know, Caleb Dawson. Let us go." Gunner's smile cracked wider. Not amused, unhinged. "You don't know him, but he knew my brother. Blew a hole in his chest the size of a dinner plate back in '98. CIA ghost operation, Honduras. Covered it up, like he always did. They gave him a medal. I gave my mother a coffin." His voice had risen, now sharp, ragged, and loud enough to make the birds stop singing. "So now, sweet thing, you tell me why'd a ghost's little girl show up in my town?" "I'm not his daughter," Eleanor cried out, fear curling into her throat. But it didn't matter. Not to Gunner. His boot stomped forward. Zephyr snapped a warning lunge, teeth bared, but controlled. Not reckless. Not yet. The men behind Gunner froze, but he didn't. He stared down at Zephyr, that fire-hardened smile thinning to steel. "That dog moves again," he growled to his crew. "You put it down." One of the bikers reached slowly under his vest. Another shifted weight, pulling a baton. Zephyr's breath hitched in his chest, his back leg tensed. He scanned them, calculating. 4 angles, 6 threats, 1 Eleanor. Then Gunner stepped closer again. Too close. Zephyr didn't wait this time. He moved. Not a wild charge. A strike. In one fluid motion, he launched his shoulder-brushing Eleanor back behind the stone wall, his jaws snapping at Gunner's thigh, sharp enough to catch fabric but not pierce skin. It was a declaration. "I could have ended you. I chose not to. Leave. Now." Gunner stumbled back, cursing. "You son of a—" Before he could finish, Zephyr planted between Eleanor and them again, crouched low, a growl now rumbling steady like distant thunder. Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't scream. But her eyes burned. Behind the men, another figure emerged from the trees. Not like them. Younger, leaner. His stance too polished. His boots too clean. He wore the same leather vest, but his eyes were scanning the situation with too much intent, noticing angles, lines of fire, cover, police eyes. He didn't speak, just adjusted his stance, quietly closed a distance between himself and the man with the hidden baton. Watching, waiting. Inside the storm, something was about to break. The silence between heartbeats felt longer than the space between seconds. Zephyr's breath came slow but shallow, ears pinned, body coiled. Every inch of him, trained, scarred, and still holding the line, was locked onto Gunner Briggs. One wrong move, one wrong breath, and he would become more than shadow and warning. He would become consequence. Gunner took a step closer to Eleanor. His boots ground gravel like bone under weight. "Tell me the truth," he snarled. You're Dawson's blood. Don't lie to me, girl." Eleanor's lips trembled. Not from guilt, from confusion. She had never heard that name before today. Her small fingers pressed into Zephyr's harness for strength. But the pressure in her chest built too fast, too hard. Her breath stuttered, shallow and sharp, like the air itself was collapsing around her. She couldn't make her mouth work, couldn't force words past the panic that clamped her ribs like a vice. Zephyr sensed it, the change in her. She was no longer just scared, she was slipping. Her pupils flickered, her hands twitched, her knees buckled ever so slightly. Zephyr adjusted his body to brace her without drawing attention, but it didn't go unnoticed. Gunnar growled, "I said talk!" And then it happened. Gunnar lunged forward and grabbed her arm, rough, quick, no restraint. The sound of its skin on denim, knuckles around bone, was louder than it should have been. In the quiet of the trees, in the breath between fury and collapse, it was deafening. Eleanor cried out, not just in fear but in pain. Her thin arm twisted in his grip and her whole body spasmed, not from the force alone but from something inside unraveling. Her fingers clawed the air. Her lips parted, but she couldn't form the word, not stop, not help, only a soft, broken sound, like glass cracking under pressure. Her head dipped. Her legs gave way. Zephyr's body surged forward half a foot but stopped. His instincts screamed, but training held. Not yet. Wait for the moment when there was no other option. Because when Zephyr moved, it wouldn't be a warning, it would be war. Gunnar didn't notice the precision in that stillness. He only saw a dog that hadn't bitten him yet. "Thought so," he spat. "Cowards always raise cowards." He tightened his grip, and that's when Eleanor's body jerked violently. Her eyes rolled back. A sharp cry tore from her chest as her body began to tremble uncontrollably, not out of fear, a seizure. It crashed over her like a wave breaking stone. Her knees collapsed, and this time Zephyr moved, not with fury, not yet, but with purpose. He caught her before her head hit gravel, nudging his body beneath her gently, cradling her weight like he'd been trained to do. But his eyes never left Gunnar. The growl returned. Lower now. Warning no longer. Behind Gunnar, the younger biker, the one who watched too closely, stood too still, moved, subtle, but sure. His hand slipped into his back pocket. Gunnar didn't notice. He was still staring at the girl now, convulsing at his feet, fury and confusion dancing in his bloodshot eyes. "What the hell's wrong with her?" No one answered. Not Eleanor, who trembled on the ground, her body surrendering to a war within her. Not Zephyr, whose snarl built like an engine ready to explode, and not the young man, because his badge was still hidden beneath leather. But he stepped forward now, voice cold. "Let her go, Briggs." Gunnar turned, startled. "What?" The younger man took off his sunglasses. "I said back the hell off. Now." Zephyr didn't look at him. But he heard the shift in tone. Authority. Control. Alley. Gunnar sneered. "Who the hell do you think—" "Detective Sawyer," the man snapped, flashing the edge of a badge stitched inside his vest. "You just assaulted a minor, an autistic minor with epilepsy. Take one more step, and I'll drop you where you stand." Gunnar blinked. Once. Twice. His men tensed behind him, unsure now. The cracks in the moment began to show. Sawyer stepped closer. Zephyr tensed, then released. The second line had arrived. But he didn't stand down. Not yet, because Eleanor was still convulsing. And the danger hadn't passed. Not until they were gone. Not until Gunnar learned this was no longer about revenge. This was about mercy. And mercy had limits. It happened faster than thought. One moment, Gunnar Briggs was tightening his grip, dragging a half-conscious Eleanor closer like a war trophy. The next Zephyr became a storm, a blur of muscle, instinct, and righteous fury. There was no growl this time, no warning bark. Only the sound of 80 pounds of trained canine fury breaking the distance between trauma and justice. And then, impact. Zephyr's jaws clamped down on Gunnar's dominant forearm with a snap so precise, so surgical, it could have been choreographed. But this wasn't theater. This was war memory reawakened. The same jaws that had once disarmed insurgents in foreign deserts, now crushed down on flesh and bone just below the biker's elbow, where the tendons pull triggers and pain humbles monsters. Gunnar screamed, a guttural roar that cracked the quiet of Cedar Grove Park. He stumbled back, thrashing, trying to shake Zephyr loose, but Zephyr was locked in, not to maim, not to kill, to end the threat. And he did. The arm went limp. The man who had crushed Eleanor's bones now stared at the ruin of his own. Blood bloomed deep and dark, a warning written in crimson. The bikers panicked. Leather jackets rustled. Boots scuffed dirt in chaos. Someone reached for a chain. Another reached for a weapon. But Zephyr had already released. He didn't need more. He stood protectively over Eleanor now, his chest rising and falling like a war drum, eyes locked with the rest of the gang. Not with fear, but with promise. The promise that if one of them moved an inch closer, he would become a ghost in their nightmares. And then there was Dante. He had been watching from the edge tattoos up his arms, one boot half buried in the gravel, eyes unreadable. Now he moved. Not toward Zephyr, toward Eleanor. He knelt beside her gently, hands raised slightly, slow, the way one would approach a wounded animal or a scared child. "Easy now, girl," he whispered, voice rough but soft at the edges. "You're safe. I won't let 'em touch you again." Zephyr growled, low and unsure, but didn't strike. Dante held his gaze. "I ain't like them," he said quietly. "Not anymore." And in that moment, something shifted. Eleanor, still trembling, eyes fluttering between seizure and semi-consciousness, reached out. Not to Dante, but toward Zephyr. Her fingers brushed his fur, and a tear slid from the corner of her eye. Zephyr leaned down, nuzzled her, just once, then returned his gaze to the threat. Detective Sawyer appeared at Dante's side in a flash, gun raised, voice like stone. "Briggs, hands where I can see them. You're done." Gunnar's breath was ragged. One arm hung useless at his side, blood soaking the fabric of his jacket. His face twisted in pain, but not just from injury, from rage. "She's Dawson's," he spat, lips curling. "I know she is. He cost me everything, my brother." "You laid hands on a child," Sawyer cut in coldly. "You lost the right to speak." "I saw her photo. Her face, it's—" "She's not who you think," Dante growled now, voice tighter, laced with something more than anger. Remorse. Gunnar blinked. "What did you say?" Dante rose slowly. His jacket fell open slightly, revealing the faint outline of a crucifix tattoo, and beneath it, something else. The faded insignia of a former unit. The same unit Caleb Dawson once led. Dante's voice was bitter, controlled. You got it wrong, Gunner. Again. Like always. The moment hung heavy. Gunner's world cracked, not from Zephyr's bite, but from the betrayal of truth. He staggered. Rage turned to confusion. The gang, once a wall of leather and threat, began to unravel, some backing away, some lowering weapons. And in the center of it all, a child, a dog, a choice. Zephyr stepped closer to Eleanor again, pressing gently against her side, grounding her back into the world. Her breath was returning, slow, fragile, but hers. And as Gunner fell to his knees, clutching his ruined arm, Zephyr stood over Eleanor like a sentinel forged in fire. Because the war hadn't ended for him. It had just changed terrain. The sirens tore through the early afternoon haze, long rising cries that split the silence left behind by violence. Zephyr didn't move. He stayed locked in place, one paw pressed lightly against Eleanor's chest, as if counting each breath she fought to reclaim. His flanks rose and fell in silent rhythm, blood still dripping in fine crimson strings from his jowls. The blood wasn't hers, it was Gunner's. And some of it had sprayed across Zephyr's collar, a faded strip of leather bearing the insignia of the 92nd Military K-9 Unit, blood on the badge. Again. His ears twitched at the sound of spinning gravel boots scattering like rats from a sinking ship. The bikers were backing away, retreating, but not entirely gone. Some lingered in the shadows of the pines, glancing between Dante and the broken form of their leader. Dante raised a hand-open palm. "Stand down," he barked, voice sharp. "That's an order." A few of the men hesitated, jaws clenched. One with a snake tattoo curling around his neck stepped forward, hand still hovering near his belt. "She's just a kid," he muttered. But Briggs said, "Briggs is bleeding because he crossed a line," Dante snapped, turning his full gaze toward him. "Touch that girl again and you'll answer to me. You forget who brought you in?" Something in his tone shifted, not just fury. Authority. Snakeneck hesitated, then nodded once and backed off. But Dante's eyes were already scanning the edge of the park, scanning for exit paths. His cover was paper-thin now, fluttering on borrowed seconds. Every cop arriving would ask why a biker was kneeling beside the girl, why his jacket carried more than leather. And Zephyr already knew. Their eyes met. K-9 and cop. Truth didn't need language. Gunner was on his knees, but not unconscious, not done. He swayed slightly, as if caught in some storm from years ago, the pain in his arm blurring into something older, deeper. Then he looked at Eleanor and growled it, a name pulled from bone-deep hatred. "Caleb. Dawson." Dante stiffened, his jaw locked. Zephyr's ears rotated. Eleanor's lips parted slightly as if the syllables had meaning she couldn't grasp, but the way Gunner said it sent a chill through the air. The kind of name that carried blood. The ambulance brakes hissed at the park's edge. 2 EMTs jumped out eyes wide as they spotted the dog hovering over the girl. "Hold the dog!" one of them called out. "Don't!" Dante barked immediately, stepping forward with his badge finally revealed. "He's not the danger. He saved her." Zephyr didn't move, but his stance softened slightly, head lowered near Eleanor's hand. She stirred at last, lips trembling, eyes fluttering. The EMT knelt carefully. "Sweetheart, can you hear me? You're safe now." "Zephyr," she whispered, barely audible. The medic looked at Dante, confused. "The dog?" Dante nodded once. "Yeah." the dog. Police cruisers followed, radios crackled, guns remained holstered, but hands hovered near them as they surveyed the scene. One officer stepped forward, eyeing Dante. "Detective Sawyer?" Dante gave a tired nod. "It's blown. I need cover. Briggs initiated contact. He assaulted a minor, nearly killed her. I had to intervene." The officer glanced at Gunner groaning, bloodied, snarling. "He said a name before we arrived. Caleb Dawson. Ring a bell?" Dante didn't answer right away. Neither did Zephyr. But the silence said enough. Eleanor was lifted onto a stretcher. As they strapped her arm, twisted and bruised, Zephyr paced alongside them, refusing to break formation. The medic hesitated. "We can't take a dog in the ambulance." Eleanor stirred. Her breathing was shallow. He comes," she whimpered. Her hand clutched the air, fingers curling into nothing. Zephyr let out the softest whine. It sounded like a plea. Dante stepped forward. "He's a registered medical K9, fully certified. Check his collar numbers engraved. He's not just a pet, he's hers." The EMTs looked at each other. One nodded. "He rides with her." Zephyr jumped into the back before they could change their minds. The doors shut, the sirens returned, and just like that, she was gone. The girl, the dog. The moment that fractured every lie Dante had told himself about staying undercover a little longer. He turned back to the bikers, what was left of them. A few had run, a few lingered, shaken. Gunner was being lifted into cuffs now, still muttering through cracked teeth about a man dead 20 years and a child who looked too familiar. Dante watched and said nothing, because there were questions coming, big ones, and the answers lay with a dog who still bore blood on his collar, and a girl who might just be the key to reopening a past that no one wanted to exhume, not even the dead. The room was too white, blinding, antiseptic white, the kind that devours color and replaces it with a quiet that isn't peace, but pause. The type of quiet hospitals hold right before the worst or the miraculous. Eleanor lay curled like a comma on the hospital bed, her right arm swaddled in gauze and plastic, suspended by a sling. Her face was pale, tinged with the waxy blue of shock. Zephyr sat at her side, chin resting on the mattress, one ear cocked for every beep, every movement beyond the door. Then it creaked open. Nora Vance rolled in her wheelchair, humming softly across linoleum. She said nothing at first, just looked, at the girl, at the dog, at the sling, the bruises, and finally, at the blood still crusted along the edge of Zephyr's collar, dried now, rust-colored and silent. Her voice broke the silence like a breath held too long. "It's begun." Eleanor stirred. Zephyr didn't move. Nora wheeled closer, her fingers twitching lightly over the armrest. Her face, aged by illness, carried none of the weakness her body betrayed. Her eyes were sharp, a veteran's eyes, trained to see not just what is, but what could have been. "He found you," she whispered. "Gunner, I prayed that man was still just a ghost." Zephyr's ears perked. Nora looked at him, and something behind her eyes flickered, a glint of memory, of sand, of sirens in another country. "Do you remember, boy?" she asked gently. She didn't wait for an answer. She closed her eyes and let the memory open. Flashback. Afghanistan, 2010. Smoke in the air. A burned-out village. The scent of cordite. Zephyr was younger, sleek, sinewed, with sharper angles and eyes like obsidian. He moved through rubble like breath, his steps measured, calculated. At his side, a woman in full tactical gear. Nora, 20 years younger, voice calm, even under gunfire. "Find the scent, Zeph. Ignore the noise. Trust your nose. Trust me." The dog halted, barked once. She raised her hand to halt the unit behind her, then gave the signal dig. Seconds later, they uncovered a tripwire meant for a U.S. convoy. He had saved 24 lives that day. Not that anyone ever printed his name. Back in the White Room, Nora opened her eyes. Her breathing had gone shallow, as if even memory came with consequences. "I trained him," she said, looking at Eleanor now. "Zephyr. He wasn't bred for comfort or cuddles. He was trained for war, for instincts, for decisions." She paused. "Just like Gunnar." Eleanor blinked. "What?" Nora's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a blanket and adjusted it near Eleanor's elbow. "Gunnar Briggs wasn't always what he is now. He was mine once, first batch of joint civilian-military tacticals, bright, strong, but there was something cracked, a hunger for command, for vengeance. He followed orders, but not with honor." Zephyr let out a low, near inaudible rumble, as if he remembered too. "After Helmand," Nora continued, "he stopped listening, started questioning who deserved to live. One day I found him in a village that had already been cleared, going house to house, looking for someone. I don't know who." Her voice lowered, now hoarse. "I pulled him out, filed a report. He was discharged for instability, but he vanished before they could reach him." She turned toward Zephyr. "You saw him again before I did, didn't you?" Zephyr stood, walked slowly to Nora's side, and sat. Their eyes locked. And for a moment, the sterile room was filled with things unsaid, the weight of decisions made in deserts, the ghosts that follow you home in the scent of gun oil and burned flesh. Nora turned back to Eleanor. "You're not safe," she said softly. "Not anymore. That man came after you for a reason. This isn't random. He's looking for something, someone, and you're in his way." Eleanor's lips parted, voice like paper. "He said a name, Caleb Dawson." Nora froze, her jaw clenched. Zephyr whined. "That name died years ago," Nora whispered. "Or it was supposed to." She reached into her coat, pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside, a photo sepia-toned and frayed at the corners. A man in uniform, smiling, young. "That was Caleb," she said. "And that's your father." Eleanor's breath caught. "What?" "He was the best of us, the only one Gunnar feared. He disappeared in the firestorm that ended our last mission. They said he was dead, but now Gunnar's saying his name again and chasing you. That means there's something left, something Gunnar never got closure on." Eleanor clutched the blanket tighter. "I didn't even know him." "But Gunnar does, and he thinks you're the key to finishing whatever vengeance he left unfinished." Nora's eyes darkened. "That makes you a target." Zephyr let out a deep, echoing growl. Not fear, not panic, just readiness. A soldier sensing the storm ahead. Nora's hands moved slower than usual. Not because of pain, she had long stopped measuring pain in scale, but because what she was about to do required precision, not in muscle, but in meaning. Across the white hospital blanket, Eleanor sat with wide, trembling eyes, her sling cradling the ache in her arm. Beside her, Zephyr stood rigid, tail still, ears twitching every time the monitor near Nora's bed gave a hesitant beep, as if uncertain whether to signal life or its decline. Nora drew in a long, purposeful breath. Her voice came out more like air than tone. "Bottom drawer," she said to no one in particular. "Right side. Under the stethoscope kit." Dante moved. He had been leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, leather jacket bloodied at the shoulder. The name Dante Cruz barely covered who he really was, and now, no longer masked by pretense, his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and still chose to stay. He opened the drawer. There it was, a small ivory envelope, sealed with red wax, a delicate V embossed on its center. He stared at it for a long beat before Nora nodded once, barely perceptible. "Give it to her." He handed it to Eleanor. She took it with both hands, one trembling, one stiff in its cast. The wax shimmered under fluorescent lights, and for a moment she didn't breathe. "Open it only," Nora whispered, "when I'm gone." Eleanor looked up, shaken. "Don't say that. You're not—" "You're smart, Eleanor. Don't lie to yourself to comfort me." Her tone was gentle. "This body has limits, and I've spent my last currency keeping doors closed that others want open." Dante turned his head away, blinking hard. Zephyr let out a soft whine. Nora turned toward Dante now, and her voice shifted stronger, lower, the voice of the soldier she once was. "You remember what we agreed on, Cruz?" He nodded, jaw tightening. "She's not just a girl anymore," Nora added. "She's the loose end everyone's afraid of, because she carries what Caleb buried." Dante lowered his eyes. "You're asking me to put a target on my back," he said. "You already did, the moment you stepped between Gunner and that girl." "And what if the others find out?" "Then you do what you've always done, adapt, survive, and protect her anyway." There was a silence then, not hollow, but sacred. The kind of silence soldiers share when the mission is no longer theoretical, when goodbye is no longer an idea, but a smell in the air. Nora looked at Zephyr. "He knows." The German shepherd, aged by years and war, took a single step forward, then another. He rested his head gently on the side of the hospital bed, as if pressing into her pulse. His eyes, dark and wet, locked on hers. "You remember the cave-in in Kandahar?" she said softly, her hand brushing his muzzle. "You stayed until the last heartbeat." Zephyr didn't blink. He could hear it now, the slowing, the way her pulse softened beneath skin. The human body knows its ending before words do. The scent of decline had begun to cling to her sheets, faint but certain. Eleanor whispered, "Are you afraid?" Nora smiled faintly. "Not of dying." She turned to Dante one last time. "There's more in that drawer. Names, locations, burn codes. But the most important thing is her. You understand?" He nodded once, and in that motion, the weight transferred, like a pact sealed not by law, but honor. Nora's hand went limp from Zephyr's snout. Her breaths grew shallow. Eleanor leaned closer, fighting the tremor in her throat. "You knew my father?" Nora nodded, eyes fluttering. "He wasn't what they said. He saw through the program, tried to dismantle it. And for that, they buried him." "But he's alive?" Nora gave a flicker of a smile. "Open the envelope when the time is right." Her eyelids lowered. Zephyr's ears flattened, and a low, sorrowful sound rose in his throat, a sound deeper than pain, a sound like mourning before death. He pressed his muzzle against her wrist, trying to feel it. One more beat. Then none. The monitor flatlined with a sound that cut the room in half. No cries, no screams, just the faintest noise as Dante removed his cap and held it over his heart. Eleanor sat frozen, hand clenched around the sealed envelope. And Zephyr. He stayed, head low, still, as if guarding the soul as it slipped into whatever sky soldiers dream of. The first light of dawn slipped through the blinds like a quiet promise, cool, golden, and impossibly gentle. It painted the hospital room in hues of warmth that belied the truth waiting in the silence. Zephyr didn't move. His head rested softly on Nora's chest, where her heartbeat used to live. He hadn't barked, hadn't whined, just laid there. Still, vigilant, like a sentry guarding not a battlefield, but a farewell. Beside the bed, Eleanor had fallen asleep in the chair, her knees drawn up, one hand clutching the sealed envelope Nora had given her. Her casted arm hung awkwardly, but she hadn't stirred in hours. The exhaustion had finally claimed her, after adrenaline, fear, and grief had wrung her dry. Nora's face looked peaceful now. The lines of pain had smoothed in the stillness. Her silver hair fanned out gently against the pillow like frost on morning grass. The machines beside her had long stopped their quiet beeping, replaced by a flat, unwavering line that no longer frightened anyone. It was not the sound of tragedy. It was the sound of something sacred completing itself. The door creaked open quietly. A nurse stepped inside, mid-30s, gentle-eyed, wearing scrubs patterned with soft colors meant to comfort children, not deliver death. She paused as soon as she saw the scene. She didn't speak, didn't call for help, didn't reach for the monitor. She simply placed her hand over her mouth, eyes dampening, heart breaking in the silence. It wasn't the death that undid her. It was the way the German shepherd hadn't moved. The way his chest rose in slow, restrained breaths, like he refused to accept that the warmth beneath his head would never return. She walked closer. Eleanor stirred. Her eyes blinked open slowly, confusion settling into her features as reality returned like fog thick and sudden. The light blinded her briefly, then focused. Zephyr. Nora. The stillness. Her breath caught in her throat. "Is she?" she asked hoarsely, voice still sleep-stained. The nurse crouched beside her, eyes soft. "She passed, quietly, peacefully, just before the sun came up." Eleanor's eyes widened. She looked at Nora, searching for the rise and fall of her chest. There was none. Zephyr still hadn't moved. Eleanor reached for her hand, whispering, "You waited for me. You stayed." There was no answer, only the thrum of morning light and the soft hum of distant life outside these walls. "She didn't want you to see it," the nurse said, gently placing a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "But you were here. That meant everything." Eleanor nodded numbly. Her fingers curled tighter around the envelope. "I didn't get to say goodbye." The nurse offered a sad smile. She knew. And then silence again. But it wasn't empty. Zephyr finally lifted his head. He looked at Nora one last time. No whimper, no cry. Just a long, steady gaze filled with something older than grief. It was understanding. The kind that animals carry when they've walked beside death before. A knowing. A reverence. He stepped back from the bed and sat beside Eleanor, leaning his weight gently against her uninjured side. She pressed her cheek into his fur, trying to breathe through the tears that wouldn't fall yet. Not now. Not while her chest still held the echo of Nora's last words. "Open it only when I'm gone." She looked at the envelope. Still sealed, still heavy. "Is there anyone I can call for you?" the nurse asked softly. Eleanor shook her head. "No. Just give us a minute." The nurse nodded and slipped out of the room like a prayer, closing the door behind her. Eleanor took a long breath. The envelope in her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the paper. It was her. Somewhere inside that ivory parchment was the past, the truth, maybe even the beginning of a future. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. She reached over and tucked it beneath the pillow beside Nora. "Later," she whispered. "I'll open it when I'm ready." Zephyr leaned into her again. His body was warm, solid, and present. And somehow, that was enough for now. They sat like that for a long time, two living souls in the quiet gravity of loss. And through the hospital window, the sun continued its slow rise, casting light over the woman who had once trained warriors, whispered secrets to dogs, and planted hope in a girl who thought she was just a complication. Nora had gone, but she had left behind a guardian, a flame, and a girl with a sealed letter in her hand and the rest of her life waiting on the other side. It was raining gently that morning, the kind of rain that didn't demand umbrellas, just understanding. It tapped against the safe-house windows in soft rhythms, like a lullaby for the weary. Inside, everything felt muted, like the world had dimmed its volume in respect. Eleanor sat at the edge of the small kitchen table, her arm still in a cast, her fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea she hadn't touched. Zephyr lay curled at her feet, eyes half closed but alert ears twitching to every shift in air, every creak in the walls. The door clicked open behind them. Dante stepped in, rain still clinging to his leather jacket. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her. Really looked like someone measuring weight, not by the load, but by the silence of someone carrying it. "She asked me to give this to you," he said finally. He pulled the sealed envelope from his inside pocket and set it down in front of her. The paper was soft now, edges slightly worn, but the handwriting was unmistakable, curved with care and strength. Eleanor stared at it. The same envelope she had seen beneath Nora's pillow, the one she couldn't bring herself to open until now. She took a breath and slid her finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, still crisp. She unfolded it slowly, the creases smoothing out like old scars. The scent of faint lavender clung to the parchment, Nora's scent. And then she began to read. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I've already gone. I don't know how many words I have left, but I'll use them wisely. You deserve the truth, not just the facts, but the thread that connects them. You deserve to know why I stayed distant, why I trained dogs instead of raising daughters, why I watched over you like a ghost instead of standing beside you. You were never a mistake, only a consequence I couldn't undo. You are my blood, Eleanor. And so is Zephyr. You've seen him now, what he is, what he does. But what you don't know is where he came from. I trained him myself, not just in commands or drills, but in trust, in silence, in war. There's a reason he listens to you without hesitation. You carry my voice inside you. Zephyr was part of something, once a unit I built from ashes and heartbreak, designed to protect those who couldn't speak for themselves. He was one of the finest. But even among wolves there were snakes. One of them was Gunner Briggs. Yes, the man who hurt you, who whispered my name like it tasted of old wounds. He was once my student, too. He was more than that. He was like a son to me. I believed in him when no one else would. But belief can become blindness, and my blindness got someone killed, his brother. He never forgave me, not truly. And when the house of lies finally fell, he looked for someone to blame. He chose me. He chose you. But this is not his story. It's yours and Zephyr's. He knows your voice now, your fear, your strength. He will guard you, not because he's trained to, but because he's chosen to. Dogs like him don't mistake loyalty for programming. They feel, they remember. And Eleanor, he remembers you. Even before you knew who he was. Even before you knew who you were. My last request is simple. Live. Don't just survive this. Live. Use the rage if you must, but temper it with kindness. Protect what's innocent. Forgive what you can. And run when the earth tells you to run. Zephyr will always find you. I promise. With everything I am, Nora Eleanor didn't realize she was crying until the page blurred. Tears fell in silence, streaking across her cheeks as her lips trembled. She pressed the letter to her chest, as if the paper still held the warmth of Nora's hands. Zephyr stirred beneath her. He looked up, sensing her shift, those deep eyes catching hers like an anchor in grief. She reached down and touched his head. "She trained you," she whispered. "She trained you for war, but you stayed for me." Zephyr leaned into her touch. No bark, no sound, just the weight of his presence, steady, grounding. Dante stepped closer, clearing his throat gently. "You all right?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked at him. At the man who had watched from the shadows, torn between two lives, biker and cop, friend and infiltrator. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she asked. "Not everything," he admitted. "But enough." She nodded slowly, then unfolded the letter again, reading the words a second time, not as a message from the dead, but a call to action. Nora hadn't just left instructions. She'd passed the torch. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the inner pocket of her coat. "She said to protect what's innocent," she said softly. Dante nodded. "Then we start there." Outside, the rain lightened. The sky cracked open with a pale hue, the promise of another day. And beneath the table, Zephyr exhaled slowly, ears forward, eyes alert. He was ready. So was she. The second page of Nora's letter was shorter, fewer words, but heavier ones. Eleanor held it with both hands now, knuckles white as her eyes moved down the page, scanning and rescanning a single line. "If I do not survive, legal guardianship defaults to Gunner Briggs. He was once family, and I believe there might still be redemption left in him." The room fell into silence. Zephyr growled. Not a bark, not a warning. It was low, unbroken, a vibration that seemed to come from the bones of the floor itself. His body stiffened beside Eleanor's legs, tail rigid, ears pinned. There was no confusion in his posture, only refusal. Eleanor folded the page slowly, as if by delaying the act she could delay the truth. "Why would she do that?" she whispered. Her voice cracked, raw from the tears she hadn't fully wiped away. The pain was no longer clean grief. It was confusion, fear, betrayal wrapped in the familiar. Dante stood near the door, arms crossed but eyes uncertain. He'd been silent through the first letter. Now, his jaw clenched. "She trusted too many ghosts," he said finally. "She thought Gunnar could be saved." "She was wrong," Eleanor replied. Zephyr shifted beside her, positioning himself between the table and the door. Guard mode, even here. "The state's been notified," Dante continued. "Standard protocol, minor. No legal guardian now that Nora's—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Eleanor stared at him, lips parted. She was old enough to understand, but too young to fight the implications. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked. "Social services will review everything. They'll likely send someone by the end of the day." Zephyr's growl deepened, as if he understood what removal meant. As if being separated from Eleanor wasn't just dangerous, it was unthinkable. Dante stepped forward and knelt beside her, voice lower now. "They'll see the medical history, the trauma. And yes, the part about Gunnar. If he pushes, if he files, he could claim rights." "He tried to kill me," Eleanor said flatly. "He didn't know who you were." "That doesn't change what he did." Zephyr placed a paw gently on her lap, breaking her spiral. Her fingers found his fur like a lifeline. The room felt colder now, like the air had receded, leaving only the threat. "There's got to be a way out," she murmured. "Nora wouldn't leave me like this. Not really." Dante looked at her for a long moment, then pulled something from his jacket pocket. A manila folder, thin but marked with official seals. "I filed something the day after she went into the hospital," he said. "Emergency guardianship. Contingent." Eleanor looked up confused. "What do you mean?" "She asked me to be your backup, quietly, off the record, just in case Gunnar showed his real face before the ink dried." He opened the folder and showed her the document, unsigned, unofficial, but there. Proof that Nora had seen the storm coming and tried to chart another path through it. "But it's not legal yet," Dante admitted. "We need to go in, file it, and fast, before Briggs gets wind of her death." "And if they don't believe you?" she asked. "Then we make them." His eyes didn't flinch. Not with bureaucracy, not with danger, but beneath the steel there was something else, something tender. "I promised her," he said softly. "I don't break promises." Eleanor nodded, biting her lower lip. She folded the letter carefully, both pages this time, and slid them into her coat pocket. Then she looked at Zephyr. "Will they try to take him too?" she asked. Dante hesitated. "They might, if they consider him a threat." Zephyr sat up straighter, sensing the weight of the conversation. Eleanor leaned closer and pressed her forehead to his. "Over my dead body," she whispered. His breath puffed warm against her cheek, like agreement. Dante stood and paced the room, restless. "We need to leave before they get here. I know someone who can notarize the guardianship. Quietly. Someone who owes me." "And then what?" she asked. "Then we disappear for a while. Let the dust settle. Give you time to grieve. And breathe." He looked down at her, then at Zephyr. "Both of you." The rain had stopped now. The silence outside was sharper somehow, like the calm before the second storm. Eleanor stood, wincing slightly at the weight of the cast. She grabbed her bag, slipped the letter inside, and nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." Zephyr moved before she did, nudging open the door with his nose. Not running, not barking, just ready. Dante followed, checking the hallway, hand resting near the concealed firearm at his waist. As they stepped outside, the sky was breaking open. sunlight slicing through gray like a reluctant promise. And Eleanor, flanked by a canine who had known war and a man who had worn 2 masks too long, stepped into the inheritance she never asked for, but would carry anyway. The knock came sharp 3 times, like a verdict being delivered before trial. Dante looked up from the paperwork, brow tight. Eleanor froze mid-bite over a plastic spoon of oatmeal, and Zephyr, who had been resting near the door, was suddenly on his feet, tail low, shoulders squared. Another knock. Then the door creaked open on its own, as if the weight of what stood behind it had bent the hinges. The man who entered wore a $1,000 suit and a face like carved granite. "Mr. Dante Vega?" the lawyer asked without warmth. "You found him?" Dante replied, coolly rising. The man walked in like he owned the building. Behind him, a younger woman from Child Protective Services trailed, clipboard hugged to her chest like a shield. "I'm Peter Hallstrom," the man said, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "Representing Mr. Gunner Briggs. I assume you've been informed he is named in the late Nora Vance's legal documents as the primary guardian of Eleanor." He said the name with clinical precision, like it was ink on paper, not a girl sitting 5 feet away trying to keep her hands from shaking. Zephyr let out a low growl. Peter Hallstrom didn't flinch. He'd read the reports. K-9, ex-military, trained, dangerous. "This paperwork confirms Mr. Briggs's legal standing," Hallstrom continued, placing the folder on the table like a trap snapping shut. "He will be here shortly to assume custody." Eleanor's chair scraped backward as she stood, face pale, body taut like a spring. "He tried to kill me," she said. "Ask anyone. Ask the hospital. Ask him." She nodded toward Dante. The CPS woman looked visibly shaken. She'd read the summary, a confrontation, hospitalization, a child with a cast and a haunted look, a war dog that wouldn't sleep unless she was in sight. "That incident is under internal review," Hallstrom replied, voice flat. "My client believed Eleanor was in danger. It was a tragic misunderstanding, nothing more." "He broke her arm," Dante snapped. Hallstrom's lips tightened. His eyes flicked toward the CPS rep. "We are not here to assign guilt," he said. "We're here to fulfill a legal obligation." Zephyr stepped between Eleanor and the lawyer, hackles raised, not barking, not lunging, but the message was clear, not a step further. Hallstrom took a careful step back. Dante stepped forward, voice controlled but seething. "Nora made an alternate arrangement. Emergency guardianship. It's not finalized, but it's valid." Hallstrom adjusted his tie. "Until it's filed and processed, it's just wishful thinking." The CPS agent finally spoke. "We need to assess the environment," she said softly. "I've reviewed the hospital footage. The girl is terrified of Mr. Briggs. The dog won't let him near her. If we place her there, we risk trauma." "That's not your call," Hallstrom replied. But even he could see the tide shifting. Dante opened a drawer, pulling out a notarized document, Nora's handwritten amendment, signed but pending official court approval. "This is," he said. Hallstrom reached for it, but Dante didn't let go. Their hands hovered over the document like 2 nations over a ceasefire. "You bring your client anywhere near her," Dante warned. "Zephyr will not wait for a command." Zephyr didn't growl this time. He simply stared at the door, waiting. Hallstrom gave a tight, sterile smile. "We'll let the judge decide," he said. "We'll let the girl live," Dante shot back. The lawyer snapped his folder shut and turned without another word. The CPS worker hesitated a moment longer, eyes drifting to Eleanor, then to Zephyr, then to the shadow of Gunner, waiting just beyond this hallway of paper shields and polished shoes. As the door clicked closed behind them, silence reclaimed the room. Eleanor sank back into the chair. Zephyr leaned into her leg, anchoring her without words. "They're not done," she whispered. "No," Dante said, "but neither are we." He reached across the table and slid her untouched oatmeal closer. "Eat," he said. "You'll need strength for the fight." Eleanor nodded, and in the space between fear and resistance, something older stirred in her spine, something like resolve. Because some wolves were not born to run. They were made to stand their ground. The city breathed in shadows. Concrete lanes glittered under orange sodium light as Dante weaved the black SUV through back roads that didn't exist on tourist maps. Zephyr lay curled in the back seat, ears twitching with every turn. Eleanor sat beside him, clutching the seatbelt with white knuckles, her cast thumping softly against the door with every jolt. They didn't speak. Not because they didn't want to, because the wrong words could be overheard. Because somewhere out there, Gunner's eyes were watching and hunting. The safe house sat behind a boarded-up laundromat on 83rd, where the neon signs had long since burned out and the pavement bore the ghosts of tire marks from years of getaway cars. From the outside, it looked abandoned, one of those buildings you forget was ever alive. Dante keyed in a rust-worn code. The alley gate clicked. Zephyr was the first out. He didn't bark, just sniffed once, then glanced at Dante, eyes narrowing. Clear. Inside, the safe house smelled of dust, lemon oil, and old secrets. 2 rooms, thick walls, blackout curtains, food sealed in vacuum packs. A medical kit sat open on the counter, syringes, gauze, iodine, a field defibrillator still humming softly from a previous charge. Eleanor stepped into the room like someone walking into borrowed skin. Her shoulders shook once. She didn't cry. Not here. Not now. Dante secured the doors, double-bolted them, then reinforced them with a makeshift crossbar. Military style. "We've got maybe 12 hours, he said, peering through a slit in the curtain. "If we're lucky." "And if we're not?" Eleanor asked quietly. "They'll try to flush us out," Dante replied. "But not before they circle." Zephyr growled low, not toward the door, toward the window. Dante turned just in time to catch a flicker of motion, something glinting above the tree line beyond the alley, moving in an unnatural fluid arc. "Stay down," he barked. A high-pitched whirr sliced the night. Then glass shattered. Eleanor ducked. Zephyr lunged. The drone crashed through the window like a dying insect, spinning and blinking and spitting sparks. Zephyr clamped down mid-air, his jaws crushing the device's rotor assembly, but not before a sharp corner sliced across his flank. He landed hard. The drone fizzled out beside him, still twitching. Eleanor scrambled forward, fingers trembling. "He's bleeding." Zephyr stood quickly, not limping, but the crimson smear across the pale fur of his ribs told the truth. Dante swore under his breath and grabbed the med kit. "It's shallow," he muttered, disinfecting fast. "Surface tear. No organ risk. No tendon." But Zephyr locked eyes with him the whole time, calm, alert, silent. Not one sound. Not even when the antiseptic burned like fire. Eleanor sat beside him and gently rested her palm on his head. Her cast thudded awkwardly against the floor as she leaned. "You stopped it before it saw me," she whispered. Zephyr didn't move. He just exhaled, slow and steady, and placed one paw on her ankle like an anchor. Outside, the drone's fragments still blinked red and green in the grass. But inside, for a moment, there was breath. There was quiet. There was loyalty in its rawest form, unconditional, bleeding, unshaken. Hours later, they sat in a triangle of silence, Dante cleaning the drone wreckage for clues, Eleanor dozing against Zephyr's warm side, and Zephyr ever watching. Dante looked up. "We'll move again before dawn." "Will he come tonight?" Eleanor asked, without opening her eyes. "He's already here," Dante replied, voice like sandpaper. "But we'll stay ahead. We have to." Eleanor finally opened her eyes. And what Dante saw in them wasn't just fear anymore. It was beginning to look like fight, like her mother before her. And in the dark, where no words could reach, Zephyr leaned his weight just a little closer against her chest. Because even wolves need to be reminded they're not running alone. The rain returned with a quiet vengeance, soft at first, like apologies whispered too late. Outside St. Harlow Medical, wind curled through the empty lot, lifting scraps of paper and plastic like ghosts with nowhere to go. A street light flickered overhead, the orange glow cutting in and out of the dark like a failing heartbeat. Inside, room 418 held only three things: the slow rise and fall of Eleanor's chest as she slept post-op, the steady click of an IV, and the silhouette of Zephyr standing at the foot of the bed, unmoving, statuesque, a sentinel carved from loyalty. Nurses moved with hushed steps. The hospital wasn't on lockdown. Not yet. But Zephyr knew before they did. His ears twitched, his eyes narrowed. And then, like a switch flipping, the storm turned. The first sign came not through the front. It came underground. The security system, a 72-hour badge protocol, blinked red once, then died. A camera feed looped. A door clicked open that should have stayed closed. In the basement, three figures emerged from shadows. Tactical boots. No insignias. Faces painted in ghost gray camo. Silenced rifles hugged to their chests. Gunner wasn't with them yet, but his instructions were simple. Get the files, clear the feed, no witnesses. The files hidden under Nora's alias, flagged post-mortem, held a truth that could bring down a black cell operation no one was supposed to survive. Only two names remained uncrossed, Gunner's and Nora's. And now Nora was gone. One remained. Upstairs, Zephyr growled a deep, rolling thunder that vibrated in the floor. Eleanor stirred, eyelids fluttering. Dante was already moving down the hallway when the emergency sirens kicked in, too late to be proactive, too soon to save everyone. He slammed through the stairwell just as the first nurse screamed, a short, sharp sound cut off by the hissing static of a taser strike. "Dante to all floors," he snapped into his radio. "Code Gray, active breach. Protect room 418 at all costs." He didn't know how many were coming. He didn't need to. If Gunner was willing to stage an assault on a public hospital, it meant desperation had overtaken strategy, and desperate men are the most dangerous kind. One of the attackers reached the pediatric wing-wrong corridor, wrong target, but he didn't care. Anyone could be a witness. That was when Zephyr launched. No bark, no warning, only the blur of fur and vengeance. The man raised his weapon, too slow. Zephyr struck center mass, jaws clamping into the shoulder of the trigger arm, dragging the intruder to the floor with a sickening crunch. Screams followed human this time, as the man writhed beneath 80 pounds of precision-trained fury. But Zephyr didn't finish the kill. He turned, sprinted back toward Eleanor's room, because there were more. Always more. Down in records, Gunner stood beneath flickering halogen lights, staring at a locked filing cabinet already splintered by one of his men. His fingers trembled not from fear, but from the weight of old sins catching up to flesh. The files were labeled with dates: Kandahar, Pine Watch, Operation Wraith. He grabbed the last one and tucked it beneath his coat. "Burn the rest," he ordered. "Boss, someone triggered the elevator override. K9 units in play." "Let him come," Gunner said, eyes narrowing. "I want the girl, not the dog." But even as he said it, something in his chest tightened, because deep down, Gunner remembered. Zephyr wasn't just a dog. He was her dog now, and that made him dangerous. Back in room 418, Eleanor sat up, heart pounding. She could hear it, the chaos bleeding through walls, footsteps pounding, gunshots masked behind muffled exits. She reached out, eyes darting, until Zephyr returned, his chest heaving, muzzle slick with blood that wasn't his. He leapt onto the bed beside her, pressing his side gently against her ribs. "They're here, aren't they?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to, because his breath was steady. His gaze was locked, and his body positioned between her and the door. Dante burst in seconds later, gun drawn. "We need to move. Now." "He won't leave me," Eleanor said, gripping Zephyr's collar. "I know," Dante said. "I'm counting on it." They slipped out through the emergency evacuation route, a narrow tunnel normally used for fire drills and forgotten gurneys. Dante led, Eleanor followed. Zephyr behind, always guarding the rear. Behind them, the hospital halls echoed with shouts and smoke. But not one bullet touched her, not with Zephyr watching. And not tonight. The hospital was no longer a place of healing. It was a maze of shadow and steel, pulsing with flickering lights and echoing alarms. The air smelled of ozone, and something burnt like gunpowder and panic had married in the vents. Every corridor Dante stepped into seemed narrower than the last, as if the walls themselves recoiled from what was coming. Beside him, Zephyr moved like breath in the dark, silent, watchful, coiled. His paws made no sound on the tile, but his ears never stopped twitching, constantly recalibrating the echo of boots from floors below. Eleanor clung to Dante's side, her hospital gown too thin for the chill settling in her bones, her IV pole trailing like a stubborn ghost. Somewhere down the hall, the locked-down doors groaned shut. "They're sealing floors," Dante muttered, teeth clenched. "They're not even pretending to be subtle." Zephyr suddenly halted. Dante froze mid-step. Ahead, two figures in ambulance scrubs approached with confident strides, pushing a gurney that looked too clean, too staged. One of them offered a friendly nod. "We're evac. Got the call for a pediatric transfer. You the guard?" Dante's hand hovered near his concealed holster. But he didn't move. Zephyr did. He stepped forward, sniffed once, twice. Then he let out a sound so low it wasn't a growl. It was a warning only predators understood. "Easy, boy," the taller man said, taking a step back. Too late. In a flash, Zephyr surged forward, jaws locking onto the man's wrist, just as he reached for something behind his back. The gurney tipped over. A suppressed pistol clattered onto the tile. "Drop it!" Dante barked, weapon drawn now, laser-focused. The second man hesitated, then bolted. Dante fired once clean shot to the knee, and the runner collapsed with a scream swallowed by the alarm system. Zephyr released the first man only when he stopped resisting, whimpering in pain. "Fake medics," Dante growled. Gunner's embedding them now." He looked to Eleanor. She was shaking, but not from fear. Her pupils dilated unnaturally wide. Her hands clenched. Her lips trembled, trying to form a word that never came. "Eleanor?" Dante crouched, panic bleeding into his voice. "Eleanor, stay with me." Her body seized. Hard, sudden, violent. The IV snapped from her arm, blood trickling down in threads as her back arched, hitting the tile with a dull thud. "No, no, no, Eleanor!" Dante knelt beside her, hands unsure, afraid he'd break her further. But Zephyr pushed him aside, gently but firmly, placing himself next to the girl. He leaned in close enough to hear the erratic breathing. Then instinct took over. He placed his head softly against her chest, paws flanking her shoulders, applying grounding pressure like he'd been trained to do during combat PTSD episodes. His eyes never left hers, not even when her body spasmed again. It was like he was pulling her back from a place beyond speech. "Come on, kid," Dante whispered. "Come back." Her breath hitched once, twice, and then she inhaled, shaky, but real. Zephyr licked her cheek once, as if to say, "You're still here." Sirens flared again above them, closer this time. The elevator panel near the ICU lit up, floor by floor. Dante's jaw clenched. "We've got 2 minutes max before the next wave hits," he said, hoisting Eleanor into his arms. "You all right to keep going, soldier?" Zephyr responded by leading the way. Not barking, not growling, just moving forward, head low, scanning every shadow like memory had returned to muscle. This wasn't a hospital anymore. This was a war zone, and Zephyr had always known how to move through war. The fluorescent hallway flickered above them, gutted ceiling tiles drooping like torn skin, wires dangling in lazy arcs. Blood trailed from Dante's forearm, a graze he hadn't had time to notice until now. Behind him, Eleanor leaned against the wall, pale but conscious, clutching Zephyr's ruff for balance. And Zephyr... He wasn't limping yet, but his breathing was tighter, controlled, measured. The kind of restraint only war dogs knew how to master. "We can't go through the main corridor," Dante said, glancing toward the sounds of boots and radio chatter echoing like a noose tightening. Zephyr turned. Then, without hesitation, he padded toward a side panel at the end of the emergency ward, an unmarked door disguised behind yellowed signage that read, "Authorized personnel only." Dante blinked. "What the hell are you—" Click. The latch gave way with a groan. Behind it, a narrow tunnel swallowed in darkness, stretched like a forgotten vein through the hospital's underbelly. "Nora," Dante muttered, realization dawning. "She showed you this, didn't she?" Zephyr looked back once, as if confirming it, then stepped inside. The air in the maintenance tunnel was stale-stained with the dust of decades and the ghosts of old systems no one bothered to maintain anymore. Pipes ran above their heads, some hissing faintly with steam. It was tight. Dante had to crouch, one hand steadying Eleanor behind him. Zephyr led the way with surgical precision. Every turn, every pause, every flick of his tail was deliberate. Dante felt it then, not just admiration, but something more rare, trust, complete and absolute. They moved for nearly 5 minutes before the sound of footsteps returned, this time from behind. Closer. "Go ahead," Dante whispered to Eleanor, guiding her forward. "Stay low. Don't stop until I say." The girl obeyed, shuffling past old crates and shadowed corners. Zephyr stayed behind, body taut, ears rotating like satellite dishes. And then 3 shapes emerged from the darkness behind them, armed, fast. "Move!" Dante shouted, drawing his sidearm. The first attacker lunged and caught a bullet to the thigh. He screamed, stumbling into the wall. The second raised a stun baton, but Zephyr was faster leaping, jaws clamping onto the man's shoulder with a force that sent him crashing to the floor. There was no hesitation in Zephyr's movements, no pause between offense and retreat. He was a phantom of force. Dante turned to fire again, but the third man had already swung low. The butt of a rifle caught Dante in the ribs. He grunted, staggered, then fired up through the man's torso. Blood spattered the pipes above. "Clear!" Dante gasped, pressing a hand to his ribs. But Zephyr wasn't done. He growled deep, guttural backing toward the tunnel entrance, sensing something still wrong. A faint beep. Then a sharp, high-pitched zip. A dart. Silent. Barbed. It tore through the air. And Zephyr moved, positioned himself in front of Eleanor. The dart struck his flank with a thud. Zephyr stumbled, his front legs buckled, and for a breathless second Dante's heart shattered. "No!" But the German shepherd stood, shaking, snarling, fury replacing pain. With a wounded lurch, Zephyr lunged at the final attacker hidden in the shadow, knocking him backward into a rusted valve. The man's head cracked hard against the steel. Unmoving, Dante rushed forward, gun raised, then stopped. There was no one left. Only Zephyr still upright, chest heaving, blood soaking through the tan of his coat where the dart embedded. "You're hit," Dante whispered, falling to his knees. Zephyr didn't flinch. He looked back at Eleanor, who hadn't moved from where she'd crouched behind an overturned drum. And slowly, he sat down. His gaze never left her. "We've got to get that out," Dante said, tearing a piece of gauze from his belt. "Hold still, buddy, I've got you." Zephyr didn't whine, didn't growl. He just leaned into Dante's hands, trusting him completely, like he had with Nora, like he now did with Eleanor. Minutes later, they emerged from the tunnel into a shuttered laundry wing abandoned during renovations. Dante led Eleanor into a supply room, barricading the door. Zephyr lay beside her, eyes glassy but alert. "He saved me," Eleanor whispered, her first words in hours. Dante turned. "Yeah," he said softly, kneeling. "And he'd do it again." Eleanor nodded. Then, slowly, she reached out, resting her forehead gently against Zephyr's. A moment passed, and then another. A silent agreement sealed between a girl broken by loss and a warrior too hurt to rest, until now. The silence in the cold storage unit was unnatural, like even the walls were holding their breath. Eleanor sat on the upturned crate, wrists trembling but untied. Gunnar hadn't shackled her. He hadn't needed to. The steel door, the guards outside, the sheer weight of uncertainty did the job well enough. But the strange thing, the terrifying thing, was that Gunnar hadn't spoken a word since bringing her here. He just sat, across from her, shadow cloaking half his face. His fingers fidgeted with something in his coat pocket, a lighter maybe, or a memory. "You're not going to hurt me?" Eleanor finally said, voice hoarse. "You would have already." Gunnar's jaw tightened. "Don't be so sure," he muttered. But it sounded like a lie, he told himself, more than her. The silence grew again, pressing in around them like thick fog. Then Eleanor reached into her hoodie pocket with slow, deliberate hands and pulled out the one thing he hadn't expected. The letter. Nora's handwriting, still sealed. The envelope creased, worn at the corners, but unmistakable. She held it out like a peace offering, or a grenade. "She wanted you to have this," Eleanor said quietly. She wrote your name, said she still believed in you. Gunner's expression cracked. Just a fracture, but it was enough. He stood abruptly, snatching the letter, tearing the seal with trembling hands. The paper rustled as he unfolded it. His breath caught somewhere between the first and second lines. His lips moved, reading silently, as if afraid the words might vanish if spoken aloud. And then his knees gave, not all at once, but like an old tree hollowed out from the inside. He sank against the wall, letter still in hand. "No," he whispered. Eleanor didn't move. She just watched him unravel. "She knew?" he asked the air. "All this time." "She knew?" Eleanor said nothing. Zephyr, restrained outside by steel and men, would have torn this place apart if he'd been able to hear the war in Gunner's chest. "I told everyone it was Caleb," Gunner finally choked out. "I made them believe it. Hell, I needed to believe it." He looked up at her, eyes bloodshot, voice shaking. "But it wasn't Caleb that shot my brother." A pause. "It was me." The words fell like a blade to stone, sharp, final. "Friendly fire," he continued, more to himself than to her. "The chaos, the smoke. I thought I was protecting my unit, I was sure. But when the dust cleared, he was lying there. My brother." His throat constricted. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth like he might be sick. "I heard the call. I saw the footage. But I still said it was Caleb. I needed a villain more than I needed the truth." The confession hung there, suspended in the sterile air. Eleanor didn't recoil, didn't flinch, because somehow, maybe because she'd lost so much already, she understood. People break in different directions, some toward silence, others toward violence. Gunner's break had just been loudest. "Why keep running?" she asked, voice smaller now. "Why keep hurting people?" Gunner laughed bitterly. "Because once you build your house on a lie, the foundation doesn't hold. So I kept patching it, one cover-up after another, until the lie became the only thing standing." He looked at her again. "But Nora, even after all of it, she still wrote this," he whispered, holding the letter like something holy. "She believed there was something left in me worth saving." "Maybe she was right," Eleanor said quietly. Gunner blinked at her. "Why would you say that?" "Because you didn't destroy the letter." And with that, she stood, slowly, steady. Gunner didn't stop her, didn't call for his men, didn't raise a hand. She walked past him, toward the door he hadn't locked. "You've still got a choice," she added. "But you can't make it in here." Gunner closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of a gun in his palm. He felt the weight of guilt and a chance, faint, fractured, but real. The city was quiet in that ghostly hour before dawn, when even sirens seemed reluctant to scream. In a rusted loft above the freight yard, Gunner stood on a metal catwalk, gun trembling in his hand. A single bulb swung overhead, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Below, Eleanor stood frozen. Zephyr lay between them, silent, not in fear, but presence, still, watching. "I ruined everything," Gunner whispered. "Nora, Caleb, my brother, the girl I once stood beside with pride." He didn't raise the gun, but he hadn't lowered it either. "There's no path left. The only mercy I have is choosing how this ends." Eleanor's breath caught, but she climbed the stairs. This wasn't about saving the day. It was about saving what remained of a man's soul. "You don't get to choose how your story ends," she said. "Not when someone else is still living in the wreckage." Gunnar turned. His eyes held the kind of pain that whispered in the marrow. "Dying isn't cowardice," he said. "It's the only truth I have left." "No," she said. "It's escape." She reached him. One word. "Stop." Not a command, an offering. Her fingers grazed his forearm, gentle, forgiving, a child who had every reason to hate him, but didn't. Zephyr exhaled. A long, low breath like something, letting go. The gun dropped, clattered. Gunnar collapsed. Eleanor knelt beside him. Neither spoke. Zephyr padded forward, sat, rested his head on Gunnar's shoulder, a presence that didn't look back but forward. "She believed in you," Eleanor whispered. "So do I." He wept, not from fear, but because someone still saw him, and for the first time in years, he felt human again. Sirens rolled closer. Blue and red lights flared at the freight yard's edge. Eleanor didn't flinch. She stayed beside him, steady. Dante's voice cut through the stillness. "Gunnar Hale?" Hands visible. Gunnar stood slowly, not resisting. "I'm done," he said. "No more running." Zephyr rose, posture relaxed, no longer bracing for battle. Officers fanned out across the rooftop, but none moved recklessly. Not with Zephyr watching, not with Eleanor standing between. She pulled out the letter, Nora's letter, edges soft, handwriting still warm in memory. "This was hers," she said quietly. Cuffed, Gunnar looked down. His nod was slow, heavy. Dante stepped closer, eyes flicking between them. "You're lucky," he murmured. "Not many men get this kind of ending." Gunnar let out a breath. "It's not an ending, just the first time I didn't lie about who I was." Zephyr moved beside Eleanor. Lay down. His ears dropped. His body eased. A sentinel gone quiet, not because the danger was gone, but because she had found her voice. "She forgave you," Eleanor whispered. "So I will try." There were no words to undo the past, but grace had its own language. Gunnar was led away. No struggle, no shouting, just the quiet descent of a man no longer pretending. Dante stayed back, knelt beside Eleanor. "He's earned his rest," he said, stroking Zephyr's back. She nodded, her hand slipping into the dog's fur. "So have you," she whispered. The stars faded as morning light spilled across the rooftop, and for the first time in a long time, there was peace. They moved slowly down the hospital steps. Gunnar flanked by 2 officers, cuffs on, boots scraping concrete. Not resisting. Dante stood nearby. Eleanor watched from the landing, hand buried in Zephyr's fur. First, snowflakes danced through the air. At the patrol car, Gunnar paused. Zephyr stepped forward. Not fast, just sure. Eleanor let go. Didn't call him back. The shepherd approached Gunnar. No bark. No sound. Just the soft press of muzzle to hand. Gunnar didn't speak. But his fingers curled. Instinct remembering trust. Zephyr blinked, then turned, walked back without looking back. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. A soldier's final salute, the kind you give to someone you once followed into fire before you learned to walk alone. The door closed. The car disappeared into mist. Eleanor didn't move. An older nurse approached quietly, holding a blanket. "He's more than a dog," she said. "He's memory wrapped in muscle, spirit wrapped in scars." Eleanor knelt, hands on Zephyr's face. Snowflakes clung to his fur like stars. "You did it," she whispered. "We're still here." He licked her sleeve, barely moved. Wind carried the scent of pine and iron. Somewhere, a church bell tolled. Eleanor looked up. Snow kept falling, but now it felt like erasure, a rewriting. Dante crouched beside Zephyr, running a hand down his back. "He needs rest." "We all do," Eleanor said. She stood, clutching the worn letter. Nora's voice still echoed in her heart words about trust, about wolves who chose to guard instead of hunt. Behind her, Zephyr exhaled, a breath long held. And in that quiet, with snow like grace falling over pain, Eleanor realized there had been many commands in Zephyr's life. But today, no command was given. He had chosen to protect, to walk away, to stay. A girl, a dog, and a detective stood in stillness. 3 survivors of one long war. And the snow kept falling. In the quiet of the safe house, Zephyr twitched in his sleep. Not dream restless, but something deeper. His paws jerked. A low sound rippled from his chest. Moonlight spilled through cracked blinds, silvering his black and tan fur. He lay on a threadbare rug, breath quickening. In his mind, it wasn't snow outside. It was dust. Heat. Diesel and blood. The convoy had broken near Sangan. 3rd truck gone. Smoke, fire, and screaming. Caleb's voice buzzed through static. "Go, Zeph! Go now!" He ran beneath twisted metal, over bodies. A jagged edge tore his vest, but he didn't stop. Under a collapsed frame, 2 boys, one trembling, one barely breathing. Zephyr crawled to them, nudged the older child. Then another blast, not near, but close. The world tilted. When the smoke cleared, Zephyr staggered upright. Caleb was gone. A sudden sound pulled him back. Zephyr snapped awake. Growl caught in his throat. Eyes wide, he searched shadows, every muscle tense. Then her voice. "Hey, easy. It's just me." Eleanor knelt beside him, wrapped in a blanket. Voice steady, calm. He turned toward her, panting, shaking. She placed her hand on his chest, over the white-scarred patch of fur. "You're safe now," she whispered. He didn't flinch, just stood, trembling, and let her hold him, the way he'd once guarded her through fevers and nightmares. "It's over," she said, pressing her forehead to his. "You got us through. You can rest." Outside, snow tapped the window. He exhaled slow, heavy like sand slipping from a broken hourglass. Zephyr lay down again, head on her knee, eyes closed, not in exhaustion, but in trust. "You miss him, don't you?" she murmured. There was no answer, only the breathing of a dog who had run through fire, carried weight no one else could. And now was held together by the same girl he once protected. They stayed like that until morning light slipped through frost-lined glass, quiet and soft. A new day, a new command, rest. And this time, Zephyr obeyed. The trauma center smelled of antiseptic and chamomile tea, oddly paired, but fitting for healing places. No buzzing lights, no metal detectors, just warm paneling and a sign. Hope isn't loud. Sometimes it just listens. Dante held the door, hand on Eleanor's shoulder. She walked in, boots too big, eyes too old. Zephyr followed, no leash needed. Dr. Leora Halston stood to greet them, gentle, notebook closed in her lap. "Eleanor," she said kindly, then looked at the dog. "And you must be Zephyr." Zephyr didn't bark. He simply moved between Eleanor and the wall, protective but calm. They entered a session room, floor cushions, bookshelves, gauzy light. Dante sat aside. Eleanor near the window. Zephyr curled beside her. Leora began reading aloud. A soft story about a bird lost in a storm, learning to sing again. Halfway through, Eleanor stopped fidgeting. She listened. And Zephyr moved. He stood, deliberate, turned away, not from her, but toward something else. In a dim corner sat a man, gaunt, 30-something, hands clutching a folded photo, eyes never still, veteran, the kind who didn't need to be introduced. Zephyr walked straight to him. He sat, lifted a paw, rested it gently on the man's knee. The man blinked, once, twice, then breathed a full breath, and another. His shoulders shook. He didn't speak, but something broke loose. Zephyr lay beside him, body pressed close. No demand, just presence. It was enough. Leora watched, silent. Eleanor turned to Dante and whispered, "He knows." Later, the man Jeremy let the photo fall to the floor. Zephyr stayed. Outside the room, Leora said quietly, "I've worked with therapy dogs 15 years. But what I saw today," she swallowed. "He's not following commands. He's following trauma signatures." Dante nodded. "Combat trained. Rescue detail." But after Nora, he changed. Changed. "No longer a weapon," he said softly. "Now, he's something else." Through the one-way glass, Zephyr lay beside Jeremy. Eleanor drew with crayons. A dog. A girl. Captioned in careful letters, "We don't leave people behind." Leora blinked. "He's doing the work of 10 therapists." Dante nodded. "That's what Nora always said, too." Inside, 3 souls kept healing. A girl relearning how to speak, a man who remembered how to breathe, and a dog who remembered everything and chose to stay. It started with a whisper, not to someone alive, but to one gone, leaving silence behind. Eleanor sat on her floor, knees to chest, beside a faded pink shoebox. Inside were letters, handwritten, sealed, all addressed the same. To Nora. No stamps, no return. Just pencil on lined paper. Words written slowly, carefully. "Dear Nora, today Zephyr helped a man who hadn't smiled in a long time. He didn't bark, he just stayed. That's what you used to do, too." She folded the note. Zephyr stirred nearby, paw twitching in sleep. Eleanor rose, barefoot, and opened the door to let in spring air. The mailbox stood at the end of the gravel drive. She added the new letter, the 7th, into the box, then turned to Zephyr. "Want to help?" she whispered. He rose, no wag, just stillness. She tapped the shoebox. "Deliver." He picked it up gently and padded down the path. Eleanor followed. At the mailbox, she opened the door. Zephyr placed the box inside. It wasn't going anywhere, and that wasn't the point. "You said she taught you more than commands," Eleanor whispered. "Maybe she's still teaching." Zephyr looked at her. No bark, just gaze deep and knowing. She leaned against him, forehead to shoulder. That evening, Dante found her curled on the porch, blanket wrapped tight. Zephyr by her side. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded. "We mailed her something." He blinked. "Yeah?" "Letters," she said softly, "for the ones who won't answer back." He looked at the mailbox a long time, then nodded. She would have liked that. Eleanor rested her cheek on Zephyr's back. "It helps," she whispered, "even if it doesn't change anything." Dante sat beside her in silence. The sun lowered. The sky turned amber. And in a rusted mailbox on a forgotten road, 7 folded letters bore witness, not to answers, but to a love that had nowhere else to go. The prison was colder than she expected, not by temperature, but by silence. It stretched along the concrete walls like unsaid things. Eleanor sat stiffly behind the plexiglass, arms folded over her coat. She hadn't spoken, not yet. Not because there weren't words, just none that felt like they mattered. At her feet, Zephyr lay still, ears pricked, not alert, not aggressive, just aware. Across from her, Gunnar sat shackled by wrist and ankle. But it wasn't the restraints that struck her. It was his eyes. They were empty. No longer the fierce gleam of a soldier, just a man hollowed by guilt. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming." She said nothing. "I wasn't sure you would." Still nothing. His gaze flicked to Zephyr. "He still watches me like he remembers everything." Zephyr didn't move, but memory hung thick between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Calm, not cruel. "Why did you ask me here?" He shifted, jaw tight with shame. "Because I needed to say it out loud, to someone who knew her." She waited. "Nora saved me. First out there in the desert, then when I came home broken. I blamed everything, the war, Caleb, even Zephyr." His voice dropped. "But it was me. Always me." "Why now?" she asked. "Because I see her in my dreams. Not angry. Just tired." Zephyr moved slightly, settling beside Eleanor. A quiet presence. "She forgave you," Eleanor said. "She wrote it in that letter." Gunnar looked down. "I don't deserve it." She studied him, not the man who once nearly destroyed everything, but someone undone by his own ruin. She pulled a folded note from her coat, not Nora's, her own. She didn't hand it over, just held it. "I wrote this last night. It says I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I'm trying." Gunnar swallowed hard. "You wanted to talk about her," she said. "Then talk." He nodded. "She once told me, 'War doesn't change you, just strips away the lie of who you pretend to be.' I thought I was a leader, a protector. Then I shot my own brother." He went quiet. "She said you used to sing to calm the unit," Eleanor murmured. A trace of a smile crossed his face. "Badly. She said I sounded like sandpaper." That made her exhale. Almost a laugh. Almost. Zephyr sat silently between them now, not guarding, just being. "You don't have to forgive me," Gunnar whispered. "But thank you for letting me say her name out loud again." Eleanor nodded, then stood. Her hand rested on Zephyr's back, steady and warm, as if to say, "We carry the fallen, even those who fell furthest." Gunnar watched her walk. As Zephyr passed, he paused, his head turned. A sound, not a growl, not a whimper, but enough to catch Gunnar's breath. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. And sometimes that was harder. Outside the visitation room, the air smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Footsteps echoed like ghosts. Eleanor waited by the door, one hand on Zephyr's collar knot to control, just presence. Inside, Gunnar remained seated. The cuffs lay idle beside him. Zephyr had barely moved during the whole visit. But now, when Eleanor clicked her tongue gently, he stood, stiff from old wounds that never healed fully, like certain regrets. They passed Gunnar. But halfway to the door, Zephyr stopped. He turned. Man and dog, soldier and witness, past and penance. Their eyes met. Then, just once, Zephyr's tail moved. Not joy, not forgiveness, just a single slow arc. Gunnar blinked. Then again. And the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow collapse. Eleanor saw. She paused at the threshold. "You're not a monster," she said. Gunnar stared at the floor. "But you don't get to stop here. You don't wear her forgiveness like armor and call it done." He looked up. "You have to keep earning it." "I will," he said softly. She didn't answer, just turned. Zephyr followed, silent as memory. Behind them, Gunnar remained, shoulders shaking, not in fear, not in shame, in release. Outside, the sky was changing, pale blue cutting through clouds like hope through grief. Eleanor exhaled. Zephyr stood beside her, ears twitching at the wind. She rubbed the spot between his shoulders. "You knew," she whispered. Maybe his tail moved again. The house welcomed them in quiet. Not the suffocating kind, but soft, lived-in silence. Like a breath held and finally exhaled. Eleanor stepped in first, backpack still slung across her shoulder like armor she no longer needed. Behind her, Dante entered with a duffel bag and tired eyes that scanned like instinct refused to sleep. Zephyr came last. No rush, no tension, just presence, as though his body remembered these walls. The door closed, and the world shrank to lavender and wood. "Go on," Dante said. "Make sure it still feels right." She didn't answer, just climbed the stairs. Her feet knew the creaky step. Her hand touched the familiar banister. At the bedroom door, she paused. The room hadn't changed. Same yellow quilt, same corkboard. One photo of Nora, one drawing of Zephyr two big paws, long ears, a gold star in the corner. Zephyr climbed on the bed without a sound, not to guard, just to rest. He curled into the light by the window and exhaled, a deep, soul-emptying breath. Eleanor dropped her bag. She sat beside him. Zephyr didn't stir, only thumped his tail once. Dante stood at the doorway, quietly witnessing. "She okay?" he asked. Eleanor didn't look away from the dog. "She's home." Dante blinked, then stepped away. Eleanor lay down beside Zephyr, forehead near his, fingers in his fur. Outside, the trees moved. A bird landed nearby. The heater hummed to life. Inside, girl and dog lay still in the light, as if time had remembered how to heal. "You did it," she whispered. "You got me through." Zephyr didn't open his eyes, but a small puff of air escaped his nose. She reached for the drawer. Inside was Nora's note. "Wherever you land, make it your own." Eleanor looked around again, at shadow and wood and warmth. Maybe it had never been about the house. Maybe it had always been about the ones who made it safe. She leaned her forehead to Zephyr's. "We're safe." This time his tail moved twice. They installed it quietly without ceremony. Just a few city workers dusting off the cedar bench, the plaque already bolted in memory of Nora and all those who served without words. It faced east, where morning light streamed through pine branches. The earth beneath was soft. The hush here wasn't silence. It was respect. Eleanor sat there, arms wrapped around herself, though the sun was warm. A thermos steamed gently beside her. She hadn't said much on the drive, just, "I want to sit a while." Zephyr lay at her feet, not alert, resting, earned rest. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Memories washed over her now, not in crashing waves, but in slow, quiet laps. Nora whistling sharp, tuneless notes, muddy boots. The way she once said, "Some wounds don't want to heal. You just learn to carry them differently." A breeze stirred the trees. Zephyr lifted his head, no growl, just awareness. Small footsteps approached. A little boy appeared, sticky hands and a rocket-stamped shirt. His mother called out, but he'd already stopped, eyes locked on Zephyr. Eleanor tensed. Zephyr stayed still, watching, calm. The boy stepped closer, then Zephyr stretched out a paw, resting his chin on it. An invitation. "Can I?" the boy asked. Eleanor glanced at Zephyr. He blinked once. She nodded. The boy dropped to his knees and reached out, fingers brushing through fur. He giggled light, pure. Zephyr didn't flinch, just softened. His tail moved once like memory, like grace. The same tail that had stiffened under fire, the same paws that had run through blood, the same heart that never gave up. Now, it allowed gentleness. Eleanor looked at the plaque again. "In memory of Nora." She touched Zephyr's back, not to comfort him, but to anchor herself, to remember that Nora's love hadn't vanished. It had folded into bark, wind, and the dog beside her. The child kissed Zephyr's head before his mother called him back. He waved. They disappeared down the trail. Eleanor leaned back. "You did good," she whispered. Zephyr blinked once. The training field was cool at sunrise. Dew still clung to grass. Eleanor stood with the golden retriever pup Leo, 6 months old, eager, soft-eyed. He had the spark. Inside the field, Zephyr waited. Not in the center, just under a lean-to, watching. Eleanor didn't yell commands. She didn't need to. Her calm was enough. "Heel." Leo trotted beside her. They started drills, scent detection, response behavior. Leo was training for a girl named Josie Epilepsy, night terrors. His job wasn't to obey, it was to know. Midway, Leo barked off cue. Eleanor crouched. "What are you feeling?" she murmured, hand on his chest. Heart beat fast, not fear, not aggression. "Just noise in the wind?" She smiled. "Try again." Leo turned toward Zephyr. The shepherd stood still, watching, not commanding, guiding. Something passed between them. Leo quieted, sat, mirrored Zephyr's posture. Eleanor didn't speak, just breathed. Healing didn't shout, it observed. Leo was learning that. They finished the session. Leo curled at her feet. Zephyr lay nearby. She took out her notebook, Nora's old one, still smelling of cedar. She wrote, "Leo is attuned, needs grounding, looks to Zephyr for cues, reached for me when I paused. Progress." Zephyr was watching her. Not Leo, Her. "Is that what you're doing?" she whispered. "Letting me take the lead?" He didn't blink. When Leo whimpered in his sleep, Zephyr rose, nudged the pup once with his nose, then returned to the shade. Whimper stopped. That was his command now. No bark, just presence. Eleanor closed the journal. "I'm not her," she said, "but I hope I'm making her proud." Zephyr exhaled and rested his head on his paws. It was enough. The shoebox was lighter now. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the floor, afternoon sun painting the room gold. The air smelled of lavender and memory. She reached into the box. The last letter, faded ink, slightly curled edge. "For Eleanor, when you're ready," in Nora's handwriting. She wasn't sure if she was. But Zephyr slept near the window. Gray at the muzzle, steady, strong in ways that outlasted youth, backlit by light that no longer demanded anything from him. She unfolded the paper. Nora's script, curved, gently words, shaped by someone who always spoke softly, but carried truth like steel. "My brave girl, if you're reading this, it means the storm has passed. Not all of it, but enough. You gave Zephyr his last mission, not with targets, but stillness, healing, and in return, he gave you his heart. I thought we trained them, but Zephyr taught me more. He taught me to listen between the words, to sense what's not said. You've become that kind of listener. You're not broken. You're built of everything that endured. And someday you'll pass that strength to someone else, just like he passed it to you. This isn't an end, just the close of a chapter that had to hurt before it could heal." With all the love I couldn't say out loud, Nora's silence followed. Eleanor folded the letter, set it gently by Zephyr's paw. His ear twitched as if sensing her. The sky outside turned to dusk. No sirens, no war, just wind and ticking clocks. She knelt beside him, pressed her forehead to his. "You don't have to protect anymore," she whispered. "You did it. All of it." His tail stirred once, then stilled. She stayed there, long enough for light to shift, long enough for healing to root not as fire, but as quiet unfolding. No medals, no parade, just a girl, a letter, and a shepherd finally asleep in peace. And this time, that was enough. In the quiet bond between Eleanor and Zephyr, we are reminded of something timeless. Love doesn't always speak in words. Sometimes it comes on four legs, with steady eyes, and a heart that listens when no one else can. This story, though born from pain and loss, leads us to a place of healing, a place where animals aren't just companions, but anchors, teachers, and bridges back to hope. German shepherds like Zephyr aren't simply working dogs. They are protectors of trust, loyalty wrapped in fur, memory carved into muscle. Their courage in chaos and their gentleness in peace reflect the very best of what we hope to find in ourselves. Through every scene, war and peace, guilt and forgiveness, what endures is the idea that second chances are real, that even those who've seen darkness can guide others back into the light. May this story inspire us to see animals not as tools, but as souls, to recognize the quiet miracles they bring into our lives, and to remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is sit beside someone hurting and stay. Love, loyalty, healing, that's the legacy Zephyr leaves behind. And maybe, just maybe, it's one we can carry forward.